Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays. It's been a while since the last one, and that's mainly because of the fact that, well, I've gone over just about every unpopular character worth mentioning up until this point. Mind you, there's still a few here or there, but I wanted to start covering other topics to keep stuff interesting. That being said, I still have a few to wrap up, and of course, as time goes on and new units are released that no one plays, I'll keep the series updated. But for now, we're gonna talk about everyone's favorite, almost but not quite a Knight of Favonius yet, Noelle. I know we're 12 episodes in and by now the disclaimer is really not all that necessary, but just in case Noelle mains are watching and thinking I'm about to trash on them for playing her, this is not a personal attack. The goal of Why No One Plays is to discuss characters in video games who are unpopular to use by the general player base, analyzing what factors in their design or general circumstance cause the majority of people to not try them out. It's also to give some more exposure to the character by showing you what they're exactly about, so that maybe some of you can look past those problems and find a new character. It's a long disclaimer, I know, but I just hope people don't take the title too literally. With that out of the way, time to get started. As the featured character of the Beginner's Wish banner and introduction to Genshin's gacha system, Noelle is the first character most, if not all of us pull when we start out this game, which means virtually all of us have tried her out for at least a short while for the first 10 adventure rank levels or so. Although I think I speak for most when I say her usage doesn't last for very long once players get their hands on more units, notably 5 stars. Early on in the game's lifespan, overall sentiments on her were that she was a reliable and serviceable unit, capable of handling just about any situation that players would come across at the time. She was more or less the only true defensive support in the game, and therefore had no real competition. On release, Genshin's character selection was sparse. There were only 2 playable Geo units at the time, and neither were 5 stars, Ningguang and Noelle. Ningguang was supposed to occupy the DPS slot for Geo, while Noelle was a tank. Given how primitive and underdeveloped the meta was at this point, everyone was under the impression that every character was perfectly viable to some extent. I actually remember the early tier lists of Genshin ranking Bennett as B tier and Noelle as A. But as many of you know by now, player perception of the roster has evolved substantially, and units previously thought of as weak were quickly discovered to be quite powerful, like Bennett and Sucrose, while the opposite occurred as well. Several characters that were originally viewed as really good, like Razor and Barbara, drastically lost relevance not even a few months after the game went live. Unfortunately for Noelle, her situation belonged in the latter category. Something interesting about her that I find very reminiscent of Yanfei is that Noelle has a very fervent player base, as in, the few who do play her have a rather high opinion of her strengths and weaknesses as a whole. And it's not even just gameplay, she's the only unit in the game to have 2 hangout events, so even Hoyo themselves appeared to take a liking to her, and I can definitely see why. In her character description, it says that she's somehow capable of being everywhere at once and performing any task given to her, earning her the moniker of Wonder Maid. And everyone more or less has nothing but positive things to say about her. At least for me, Noelle reminds me of that one character in almost every anime who doesn't particularly stand out in any way, but there's someone you can trust and would make a really good friend, which ironically works to her detriment. Even before we get into her gameplay, Noelle as the character is, by all accounts, a normal person in the context of this game. If there's one thing anime is famous for, it's their very fantastical and sometimes unrealistically outlandish characters, either in terms of appearance or in personality. Even in plain settings like high school, they're intended to be exaggerated or cartoony. I seriously doubt anyone's high school lives are even remotely close to what happens in Toradora or Kaguya-sama. I don't think any high school volleyball team is as extreme as Haikyuu, nor do I believe a ghostwriter's life is accurately portrayed in Violet Evergarden. Naturally, in a fantasy isekai setting such as Genshin, it's blatantly obvious that these characters are intentionally made to be very striking in appearance and have their own quirky personalities. That's what makes them so unique. Do you seriously believe nuns in real life look like this? Now in contrast, Noelle's personality and even appearance is a bit on the blander side, unless you have a maid fetish, which to her credit a lot of weeds do. But I think you get what I mean. She's a very inconspicuous character. Pleasant to get to know, I'm sure, but unremarkable by anime standards. This distinction carries over into how she performs in combat as well. The Geo element places an emphasis on sheer brute force, with several of its units utilizing defense for more than just protection, and Noelle was the first of her kind. To figure out how she uses defense to her advantage, you need look no further than her elemental skill and burst. Breastplate inflicts a burst of geo damage to surrounding opponents while creating a shield whose durability scales off of her defense. Additionally, while active, Noelle's normal and charge attacks have a percentage chance to heal her team for a portion of her defense. So both her shield strength and regeneration are influenced by her defense stat, which is already conducive to her survivability. In other words, she gets more mileage out of building defense than just about any unit in the game in terms of just pure defense. As for her burst, sweeping time is also a burst of geo damage to surrounding opponents, but unlike her skill augmenting her survivability, she gains more offensive pressure from this ability. For 15 seconds after cast, she gains vastly more attack range, giving her arguably the best melee auto attack reach even to this day. Additionally, she gains increased attack based on her defense, and her normals are converted to geo damage that can't be overridden by any other elemental infusion, meaning she will still do geo damage while under the effects of, say, Bennett's Fantastic Voyage with Constellation 6. And it's not a small measly attack bonus either. At level 13, the conversion rate is 85%, and with Constellation 6, this is increased to 135. Optimal itemization of Noelle can push her attack stat to well over 6,000, and if you layer party skills on top of one another, the results are staggering to say the least. I think I'm starting to see the reason why they call her the Wonder Maid. Going off on her skill and burst alone, it seems like she's got an equal balance of power and resilience, not uncommon in Genshin's roster and certainly not among her fellow Geo units. There are several characters well sought after for their ability to cover both fronts, so this should be seen as a positive for her, but let's see what else she has. Her two passive talents are Devotion and Nice and Clean. For the former, if your active party member reaches dangerously low on health, they immediately gain a shield for 4 times Noelle's defense, though since it has 150% damage absorption, it's more like 6 times her defense. I've seen some Noelles with about 4,000 defense. That's not half bad of a shield all things considered. Definitely a nice safety cushion to have. For the latter, every 4 attacks decreases her breastplate's cooldown by 1 second, allowing her to have her shield up practically at all times. She really embodies the tanky bruiser archetype in this game. At the time of making this video, there's not a single dungeon or enemy in this game whose damage outpaces the rate at which Noelle can maintain her shield, and not even the Rift Hounds, because remember, while breastplate is active, her auto attacks regenerate health for her entire team, cancelling out the bleed. You'd be hard pressed to find a more unkillable team composition than Noelle and Zhongli. She has the potential to be an incredibly strong unit, especially for a 4-star. Granted, almost every 4-star unit in this game needs max constellation, but in all honesty, if you've been playing the game for a while, even free-to-plays average C6 by now, especially since she was one of the OG 4-stars. Defensively, Noelle is in contention with Zhongli for the top spot, though it does require significant investment to do so. And offensively, a lot of discussion has been thrown around about her potentially matching Ito's damage output, but that also requires a significant amount of investment to do so. Therein lies her main problem. She is, for all intents and purposes, unusable at base. Almost all of her effective power hinges on how high her defense stat is, meaning you won't be able to get much out of her until later in your progression. Why this matters a lot, and I mentioned this once or twice before, is that in general, the mindset of most players is to achieve the highest reward for the lowest amount of effort and/or time possible. Or in layman's terms, we're extremely lazy. I don't know how many of you know that one Bill Gates quote that goes something along the lines of, "I choose a lazy person to do a hard job because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it." That's how gamers are. They will only go the extra mile for something if there's veritable proof that it progresses them further than any other option. Noelle demands an exorbitant amount of resources to reach her maximum potential, and even if you possess the wherewithal to get it to that point, you really only end up with just a beat stick, a lot of attack and defense, not much else. Mind you, it's a lot of attack and defense, but it's still attack and defense. Now, utility in this game matters a lot more than damage, because most team compositions consist of a main DPS, sub DPS, and 2 supports, or a main DPS and 3 supports, so support characters don't have to compete as hard over each other since there are 3 slots instead of 1. That being said, in Genshin's present state, defensive support is seen as less favorable over offensive support. While making her entire party nigh indestructible sounds like a pretty good deal, much like Qiqi or Barbara, seldom do you run into a situation where you're taking so much damage that it warrants a dedicated tank or healer. In her defense, unlike Qiqi and Barbara, Noelle can convert that tankiness into damage without losing out on effectiveness. However, that brings us back to the original problem where she needs extreme amounts of optimization just to compete with the quote-unquote meta units, and again, she doesn't exactly provide anything other than just damage and protection. For the sake of comparison, Diona is also a shield and healer, but she provides elemental mastery, and she's one of the cheapest ways to chain freeze by virtue of her element. It also doesn't help that there are so many characters in Genshin with party shields, so having a shield isn't a novel concept like it was back in version 1.0. In the offense department, her ridiculous attack stat is diminished by the element she belongs to. Geo as an element offers absolutely zero benefit to your combat pressure outside of its resonance enduring rock. So while she does have insane raw based attack, she doesn't have Vaporize, Melt, or even 40% Elemental Shred from Swirl, as Geo doesn't interact with Anemo in any way. Going in more detail about that, In light of Geo being a very insular element, Noelle requires a very specific team composition to be effective. Geo units are well known for synergizing with one another. Odds are if you want to use Ito, Ningguang, or Noelle, you also might need Albedo, Zhongli, and Goro well geared out. But that's really as far as you can go. This means if you don't have those units, you'll never be able to use Noelle to her fullest extent, as she's a main damage dealer on one of the worst elements to be a main damage dealer in. Not a whole lot of flexibility. That isn't to say that you can't make use of Venice, Xiangling, Xingqiu, or Sucrose, but it's nowhere near as effective as it is on any other damage dealer such as Yanfei. Many like to consider her as the Swiss Army knife of Genshin. She's an all-rounder type character. Damage, shields, defense, claymore user, consistent damage, good area coverage. True to her in-game lore, she can accomplish any task you impose on her. Thing is, she's never the best choice for that task. If you need damage, there's a plethora of other choices with far less investment required. Do you need healing? Bennett or Tiona are better choices. Defense is her only shining virtue, but currently we don't need tanks in this game. Perhaps in the future, if Hoyo ever decides to ramp up enemy damage output, she might be useful in the future, but they don't seem to have any interest in doing that anytime soon. When it comes to gacha games, metas are formulated on the basis of specialization. It's far more practical to be good at one thing than to be average at a lot of things. That's why even if there are no established classes in Genshin, we as the community tend to compartmentalize characters into our own official classes, main DPS, sub DPS, utility, what have you. And in every guide you see, there's often a segment that talks about optimal parties and formations for characters. For example, if you're trying to optimize Hu Tao, she's a tactical nuke, and so the goal is to make that tactical nuke even more tactical by throwing in conduits for vaporize or melt, reducing enemy defense, shredding resistances, maybe throwing a bit of regen to compensate for her self-inflicted damage. Point being, you specifically orient your team around a goal and do whatever you can to reach maximum efficiency. Even for the Raiden national team, widely thought of as the best all-purpose team in the game, to optimize it, people build more damage on Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Bennett since you don't need that much energy recharge thanks to Shogun, whereas if you were putting any of those three characters on a different team comp, they would be occupying a different role. Make no mistake, you can count on Noelle to get the job done. She's not a bad character by any means, but she's forever a B-list actor, never an A-list if that makes sense. Honestly, that's every 4-star damage dealer. Beidou, Yanfei, Fischl, Ningguang, Noelle, they're never gonna hold a candle to the 5 stars. And frankly, they shouldn't, otherwise that would defeat the purpose of the rarity of 5 stars. Fortunately for her, there is a silver lining. If you remember at the start of the video, I said that Noelle mains passionately believe their waifu is underrated, and surprisingly that praise isn't groundless. All of her problems mentioned thus far are circumstantial. Problem 1, she takes a lot of investment. True, but say you get lucky with a few defense artifacts. You have C6 on her from trying to go for 5 stars and to have decent weapon. Problem solved. Problem 2, her ability to make her team invincible, while not necessary, is an awesome niche to have, especially if we run into more survival-focused domains instead of DPS checks in the future. Noelle could be a speculative investment, who knows? And finally, problem 3, you need specific units to use her efficiently. Well, if you have them, then there you go. And lest we forget the best part about her, while she needs a lot of gear, she's very easy to gear up. For every one good artifact you get, there's like hundreds of defense rolls. You obviously need 4-piece Husk and Redhorn Stone Thresher, but she has a lot of build options. Although, if you pulled for Stone Thresher, there's a high chance you pulled for Ito as well, and if you pulled for Ito, there's not much of an incentive to invest in Noelle since she does less overall damage than him. That's just it, it's hard to really sell any of Noelle's virtues. Let's say you're trying to buy a car. You have one car for $50,000 and another for $60,000. Both cars are the same more or less, except the $60,000 one has, proximity sensors for the sake of argument. It would be nice to have that, but do you want to pay an extra 10 grand for it? Probably not. That's why being a generalist is more often than not a bad thing for a character, since players always want to have the best option for the cheapest price or the least amount of effort required. So they'll naturally go after the characters best suited for the job. Alternatively, you could be the best at everything like Kazuha or Shogun, but Noelle is a jack of all trades, master of none. I think that about wraps up everything I have to say about her, so we're gonna end it off here. Let me know if you have any thoughts on Noelle, or if you think I missed anything important on her, feel free to share it in the comments down below. For now, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other Why No One Plays episodes after this one. But until next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.